Honey, I'm home. What's that? Hey there, Jared! What are you imagining when talking about ancient Rome? Are you thinking of a city of marble, Olympian gods, marble statues rivaling the best pieces of art ever created? Or are you picturing a dirty, stinky, loud shell of a city challenged only by modern high school bathroom stalls, with piles of garbages everywhere, sometimes reaching as high as whole apartment buildings? Without wanting to spoil too much, one of those two images is correct. I won't tell you which one though. Who the hell are you? Oh, don't worry about that for now, as today we are gonna take a look at how to survive a day in ancient Rome. Where are we? And what's that stench? That, my friend, is the ever-wonderful fresh air of the city of Rome around 20 BCE. The what? Oh, sorry, let me just... There we go. As I just said, we are in the capital of the freshly founded Roman Empire. A city brimming with life and the first city in Europe and even in the whole world to ever reach 1 million inhabitants. Something that would take another 1,800 years before a second European city was able to replicate that amount. Ew. What's all this? That, my friend, are the streets of Rome, filled with ever so lovely things like garbage, urine, feces and corpses. Corpses? Why, of course corpses! As the biggest city ever to exist up to that point, Rome produced a lot of lovely things, one of which was roughly 150 dead people each day. And not all of them can get a proper funeral, so it's safe to assume that around 4 to 5 dead bodies were added to the landscape of what some would call the pinnacle of society at the time. Of course, all of those people who couldn't get a funeral due to lack of wealth or simply because nobody knew who they were so no one cared to bury them, were left lying around in some alleyways and even on the sidewalk. Speaking of sidewalk, I wouldn't stand there if I was you, buddy. Why? Well, Rome had laws for proper garbage disposal. Most Romans followed the much simpler, dump it out the window when nobody's looking approach, which, besides broken pottery and food waste, also included their man-made waste products. That's disgusting. Maybe, but what's more important is that you can't walk around the way you are now. You need to dress like a proper Roman if you don't want to be arrested. Arrested for wearing the wrong thing? Not necessarily arrested, but you would be punished for it. Romans took the traditional toga so serious that the first emperor, Emperor Caesar Augustus, instated a law that any one person was only allowed to access the Forum Romanum while wearing a proper toga. Okay. Where do I get that toga from then? You can't be serious, right? So far the city's a little shithole, but I can't imagine everything being like this, right? Like, what about the rich people? Yes. While the richest part of Rome maybe didn't have to deal with as much excrement, it's not like it was gone completely. Similarly, being born into an aristocratic or rich family didn't necessarily mean your chances of survival rose. In fact, most newborn babies didn't even make it past their first year. That also goes for the aristocratic part of Rome. Take Empress Faustina the Younger, for example. As the wife of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, her job was to give birth to an heir of the throne, and you better believe she took that job seriously. Depending on which historian you ask, she gave birth to something between 11 and 16 children, only 6 of which managed to survive childhood, and only 3 are confirmed to have become adults. So just because you're rich didn't mean you'd have better chances of survival. Regardless of that though, your chances of becoming an adult were definitely worse if you were born a slave or into poverty, cause then, additionally to being poor and perhaps homeless, nobody also cared whether you lived or died. Oh, that's a bit bleak. But were there even many homeless people in Rome? Oh yes, of course. In fact, many apartment buildings were constructed around the case that someone couldn't pay their rent. Look at this one for example. As you can see, this room has a big hole in the center. This is where the entrance to your apartment was. As you can imagine, whoever rented this room had to get in using a ladder. Now a ladder makes it of course very easy for your landlord to punish you for not paying your rent on time, as he would just take it away if you didn't, so you couldn't even get into your own home anymore. Great. On top of whatever the fuck this is, I'm also getting kinda hungry now. Well, lucky for you, whoever inhabits this apartment doesn't seem to belong to the part of society suffering serious starvation, since they seemingly left their stove on while going out. Anyways, as you may be able to imagine, a city as big as Rome has absolutely no way of producing food for all 1 million inhabitants. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to you that almost all the food they needed had to be imported from other nations, like North Africa, namely Egypt, or places like Sicily. It's been estimated that Rome needed around 500,000 tons of food each year just to keep the city from starving. To put that number into perspective, the average loaf of bread weighs around 500 grams, with 500 grams of bread per loaf and a needle total of 500,000 tons, or 500 million kilograms, or 500 billion grams. We can calculate that Rome needed roughly 1 billion loaves of bread every year. Now, if you were to lay that bread out on the floor, it would cover an area of roughly 10,000 hectares of land, which is about twice as big as the entirety of Manhattan. Of course, those food imports didn't just feature things to eat, but also things like wine, which made it even more sad when you heard that yet another ship has been ambushed by pirates or sank due to bad weather. Which was a surprisingly common thing to happen at the time, since their best weather forecast consisted of praying to the gods that they will make it. What's that smell? Oh, it seems that the stove that has been left on started to set the apartment on fire. What? Well, as you can see, Rome was by all means not at all built out of marble and stone. In fact, most houses were constructed tightly next to each other and very cheaply. And what's the cheapest building material you can imagine? Correct! Wood! Therefore, the houses and apartment buildings were constructed almost entirely out of easily flammable substances. If you add to that kitchens weren't a thing yet, so the food was cooked on an open fire in the middle of the living room, as well as remember that the only light sources at the time were oil lamps and torches, it should be obvious to expect that Rome was easily set on fire. It's safe to assume that a small fire broke out almost every night, with major fires that would destroy the whole neighborhoods happening every few months or years. Oh, you think it's time to get us out of here? Oh, sure thing, pal. Why is nobody trying to stop the fire? Well, in a time of no running water nor hydrants, buckets were the only thing people had to try and stop the fire. Obviously, nobody wanted to take a bucket, fill it up at the nearest water fountain, run all the way up to an apartment and dump it on ever bigger growing flames, since everyone knew that by the time they got up to the burning rooms, it would have already been too late anyways. On top of that, we know from various different Roman authors that the youth often enjoyed watching the bright flames as they lit up the night sky. So at least the people could enjoy the show. Oh, the heat and smoke made me kinda thirsty now too. Ah, how fortunate that there's a well right here. You want a sip of some fresh Roman water? Oh, thank you. Ah, what the fuck? That was a test. You failed. What now? Why do you think Romans drink wine, Jereb? My name isn't Jereb. Ask you a question, Jereb. Answer me. Because it tasted nice? Well, that too, but mainly because the water was dirty and often contained bacteria that could make them sick if consumed raw. So, while Romans noticed that drinking water out of the well does not lead to a healthy life, they did also see that mixing it into wine, the water was suddenly drinkable. On top of that, drinking pure wine was in some parts considered animalistic, which was a tradition they copied from the Greeks, as they too also watered down their wine. So instead of drinking the water as it is, here's some watered down wine instead. This isn't another test, is it? Oh, heavens no. I'd not test you again right after you failed my previous test. Yes. Well, thank you then. Oh, wow, this is sweet. Indeed it is. The Romans liked their wine extremely sweet and would sometimes go as far as mixing 3 kilograms of honey into 12 kilograms of wine, making it at 20% honey content. So the ancient Roman wine can be best compared to today's syrups and food sweeteners. But honey was only for the rich. Everyone else had to get the cheap wine that was sweetened with cheap materials, mainly lead and marble dust. Do you say lead? As in the poisonous metal lead? Yes, indeed. Lead was, while being toxic, a very cheap and useful mineral. Romans made their cookware out of it. They built their water pipes using lead, they used it to sweeten their food, and even sometimes had rich women apply the lead powder as some sort of makeup onto their faces. Now Romans aren't dumb though, they knew that excessive lead consume and ingestions were deadly, which is why they for example liked having water rich in limestone running through their pipes, as they knew that the limestone would eventually build up on the inside of the lead pipes and therefore insulate it from the toxic metal. But if they knew lead was poisonous, why would they use it for so much? Well, simply put, the Roman scientists believed that it isn't the lead itself that's the problem, but rather the dose. Thus, they thought that little doses of lead each day would be less harmful as one big dose in a short amount of time. Of course, today we know that lead is poisonous and deadly in any dosage. But don't worry, as their wine was rarely ever consumed just for fun, or at least it wasn't for the common individuals. The aristocratic part of society often had banquets involving heaps of wine, as well as exotic foods. Then normal civilians on the other end often had a meal consisting of bread, olive oil and wine. What the Romans would do is dip the bread into oil and then wash it down with wine. So how about we try ourselves a tasty Roman breakfast consisting of bread, oil and wine? Or maybe a yummy lunch including bread, oil and wine? Or what do you say about a fabulous dinner made up out of bread, oil and wine? I'll pass. Well, your loss. As you may imagine, a diet consisting of the same 3 ingredients multiple times a day can rarely be called healthy, which is why scurvy was one of the most common diseases to have in the city. Ow! Ah! Ow! The other most common disease being malaria. What did you just say? Even though malaria doesn't immediately kill someone, it would often carry those people over the edge that are already... Hey, Jared. Uh-huh. Remember what I said about standing too close to apartment buildings in the beginning of the video? What video? You're joking. Au contraire. But not to worry, Jared. Luckily for you, the doctors of ancient Rome already knew the almighty solution to both of your problems. According to them, sickness as well as dirtiness can easily be undone by a good long soak in one of Rome's public bathhouses. They were available for the public? Why, of course, you silly bastard! Why else do you think they're called public bathhouse? Oh, okay. Where can I find one there? Wait a minute, is this another trick? Why in the world would I ever try to trick you? Well, fine, I guess I'll just go with it then. Where can I find one? Let me take us. Oh wow, this is quite luxurious. How about it then? Not gonna jump into the relaxing hot water? Oh yeah, right, of course. This is good. It sure is. Oh no, I don't like how that sounded. Oh, I so scared my mortal companion. There's absolutely nothing bad about the hot and steaming baths of the time. At least if you share the Roman beliefs, that is. What's that supposed to mean again? Well, you see, today's swimming pools and public bathhouses could certainly be considered cleaner, even if yet another child is, let's say, leaking into the water again. The reason for that is that today's baths and pools are being kept clean by the use of chlorine or extensive amounts of salt. Thus, it's relatively hard to have bacteria spread throughout our public fun zones. However, the Romans didn't use any of that, which is why their baths were a paradise for bacteria to spread, and it wasn't rare to leave the bathhouse with more diseases than you came in with. Since Romans thought that a visit at a local steamy center would clear them of their sickness, most of them would instead distribute it into the public waters for others to catch. So while the bathhouses of Rome would certainly keep your body clean, doesn't mean that they were good for your health. But that's not a problem, since the Romans also didn't believe in such nonsense as bacteria. To them, most illnesses were caused by divine punishment, since that obviously makes more sense. Alright, get me out of here. Oh god, I forgot about the stench. I thought Rome had sewers. Why wasn't the waste removed through the sewers? Oh, silly you. The sewers weren't meant to get rid of waste products. Their primary task was to drain the city of water when the rainy season comes about. Even though you could throw your waste into the sewer gates that are around the streets, nobody really cared about that. But if there's a sewer network, why don't you just connect the houses to it? Well, first of all, having your own bathroom or toilet is something that was blasphemous to think about back then. The Romans used public toilets, and for good reason. While it is true that anything from the inside of the house could be removed through a home connection to the sewers, you gotta remember that those pipes were not one-way connections, meaning things may be able to leave your house if you want them to, but at the same time everything from inside the sewer can also take a detour to visit you whenever it wants to. Now that obviously isn't limited to Rome's tiniest inhabitants, like rats, but of course also inanimate things like the sheer stench. I mean, look around the city now and imagine that the stench you smell now still exists, except in this case it would be inside your house. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But that's not all, my simple-minded companion. Keep in mind that when a flood season comes around, it would obviously also flood the sewer system and therefore push the sewage up and, had your home a connection to those sewers, back into your house. And surely you don't want that, right? Did you just say flood season? Why, of course. Surely you know that the legendary Rome has been built on 7 hills, right? Yeah? Well, have you never thought about why it had to originate on those 7 hills? The answer is rather quite obvious. Rome was built in a swampy biome, meaning that extreme rain isn't a rarity around here. Now consider that Rome was built on the Tiber, a river prone to have strongly rising water levels whenever said rainy season comes about, and on top of that, was built on the one singular lowest spot around the Tiber, where the rising water levels would result in immediate floods. It should come to no surprise that Rome would regularly be flooded. Typically, a small flood would occur every year, with bigger floods happening every 3 to 5 years. Now, the small floods weren't necessarily a huge problem to deal with, since you could just go onto a slightly elevated place and typically still have dry feet. But the bigger floods, on the other hand, were large enough to transform Rome into Venice 2.0, or rather Venice 0.9, considering that the actual Venice was founded over 3 centuries after the city of Rome was. Regardless of that, we can be sure that floods like this were real, because various different ancient authors describe these floods and how people had to float on boats through the streets of Rome. So what do you think about the Roman floods? You like them? You wanna see the Roman version of Venice? Not really, to be honest. Well, good for you, because here comes one now. Sorry, what now? What have you done? Oh, don't worry about it. Rather, I think you should start running. Wink, wink. Oh, God! I made it. Oh, God. I made it. Indeed you did. Luckily for you, Rome was not only built on the famous 7 hills where the aristocrats, senators, emperors and rich people live, but also in its hundreds of years of existence, didn't hesitate to make new hills either. In what sense? Well, look at what you're standing on right now. Rome quite literally built garbage mountains, mainly consisting of ceramic shards and broken pottery that all just got dumped onto one huge pile, sometimes even growing hundreds of meters large. However, due to its not at all safe building technique, these mountains would often just collapse and bring upon a, let's call it, a garbage avalanche. Oh, what's happening? Garbage mountain collapse. Oh, thank God I'm back. Well, I have to congratulate you, Job. You did indeed, to my surprise, manage to survive a day in ancient Rome. So what you say, huh? Wanna take a quick look at your stats after this exciting adventure of a day? Say what? Did you just say... Ancient Rome, what a time to be alive! What the fuck?